On December 6, 2025, Japanese F-15 pilots were tracking Chinese carrier operations over the Miyako Strait when alarms screamed across their cockpits. A group of nearby Chinese fighters had switched to fire control radar, the very targeting mode used in the final seconds before launching missiles. The pilots held formation, tense, uncertain whether this was an error or the beginning of something neither side could stop. 3 minutes crawled by before the lock finally released. Then, hours later, it happened again. Now it was clear, this was no coincidence. In late 2025, Japan made history by appointing 64-year-old Sanae Takaichi as its first female prime minister, a milestone in a country whose national leadership has long been dominated by men. She rose to power amid turmoil within the ruling Liberal Democratic Party as political instability and collapsing public confidence forced a change in leadership. Takaichi is known for her conservative views. She admired former British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and champions former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's conservative vision for Japan. Most importantly, she supports a stronger Japanese defense posture, particularly in response to growing regional security threats. A China hawk, she's a regular visitor to Yasukuni Shrine, seen by China, the two Koreas, and other Asian nations as a place that glorifies Japan's wartime past. Almost immediately after taking office, Takaichi attracted international attention with one of her first major public statements. During a parliamentary session, she was asked to clarify what kinds of situations could justify Japan using its self-defense forces under existing law, which only allows military action in cases that threaten Japan's survival. In response, she stated that if China were to use warships or military force against Taiwan, such a scenario could constitute a survival-threatening situation for Japan and potentially trigger a military response. While framed as a hypothetical, the remark was unusually direct. Previous Japanese leaders had stayed deliberately vague to avoid provoking Beijing, which considers Taiwan part of its territory despite Taiwan's de facto independence. Takaichi did not. Her direct comment sparked a diplomatic backlash, and tensions between the two countries, already high over territorial disputes in the East China Sea and even centuries before, climbed higher than ever. Within weeks, Chinese fighters would target the very aircraft she'd vowed to protect. On December 6, 2025, Chinese carrier aviation drills were underway in the Miyako Strait, a narrow and highly sensitive corridor between Okinawa and Taiwan. The PLA Navy aircraft carrier Liaoning was conducting takeoff and landing operations in the Pacific, launching Shenyang J-15 fighter jets, heavy twin-engine carrier-based aircraft, derived from the Russian Su-33 and designed for air-to-air and anti-ship combat. As expected, Japan scrambled F-15 Eagles, long-range, high-speed air superiority fighters based in Okinawa, to monitor the drills. Then, without warning, the dynamic changed. Inside the cockpits of the Japanese F-15s, threat warning systems suddenly came alive. The tone that filled the headsets was unmistakable. Chinese J-15 fighters had switched from search radar to something far more aggressive, fire control radar. This is the targeting mode, the one that locks onto a specific aircraft and feeds data directly into the missile guidance system. It compresses reaction time to seconds. It signals intent. The first lock occurred in the morning and held for roughly 3 minutes. Pilots maintained discipline, did no evasive maneuvers, and deployed no countermeasures. Instead, they held formation, waiting to see if the Chinese would back off. They didn't. Later that same day, a second block followed, this time stretching to approximately 30 minutes. The radar lock-ons were intermittent but persistent, a pattern inconsistent with routine operations. Fire control radar is typically activated only in the final phase before weapons release. While no missiles were launched, every pilot in the air understood what was happening. These were brazen, simulated kills. Though there were no shots fired, and there was no breach of Japanese airspace per se, what began as a routine shadowing operation turned abruptly into a live targeting scenario. As expected, the diplomatic fallout was immediate. Beijing's response came first, accusing Japan of all-out harassment. Senior Colonel Wang Shuimeng, spokesperson for the Chinese Navy, defended China's flight operations near Miyako Island, saying that Beijing had announced the exercises in advance and claiming that Japanese aircraft interfered with the drills. In a statement posted that Sunday on the Chinese Ministry of Defense's website, he announced, quote, "We solemnly ask the Japanese side to to immediately stop slandering and smearing and strictly restrain its frontline actions. The Chinese Navy will take necessary measures in accordance with the law to resolutely safeguard its own security and legitimate rights and interests. Japan rejected the accusations, with Tokyo stating that Chinese military aircraft had directed fire control radar at its fighter jets, despite Japanese aircraft maintaining a safe distance. Meanwhile, Defense Minister Shinjiro Koizumi lodged a formal protest, calling the actions highly regrettable and dangerous, saying they went beyond what's necessary for safe aircraft operations. Chief Cabinet Secretary Minoru Kihara stressed the importance of maintaining communication channels between the two sides, but declined to say whether a bilateral hotline was used during the radar lock-on incident. Japan and China established that hotline in 2016 for exactly these moments: direct communication between defense authorities during unexpected or high-risk military encounters. The refusal to confirm whether the channel was used leaves open the question of whether the escalation was actively managed in real time or allowed to play out without direct coordination. In the midst of this melee, the United States and Australia were also watching closely. The U.S. State Department condemned the Chinese actions as, quote, not conducive to regional peace and stability, adding that the U.S.'s, quote, commitment to our ally Japan is unwavering, and we are in close contact on this and other issues. But Washington's response has been complicated. The State Department backed Japan quickly, but President Donald Trump appears focused on preserving a recent deal with Chinese leader Xi Jinping. There are concerns in Tokyo that the U.S. may seek to avoid actions Beijing could view as provocative. That calculation could encourage Chinese risk-taking, particularly if Beijing believes Washington will restrain Japan. Tokyo is accelerating its military buildup while expanding its defense ties beyond its only treaty ally, the United States. It now considers Australia to be a semi-ally. And it was precisely Australia that spoke most directly about the incident. Following scheduled talks in Tokyo, both defense ministers expressed worry over the development. In a joint press conference, Australian Defense Minister Richard Marles stated that Australia does not want to see any change to the status quo across the Taiwan Straits. China is this country's largest trade partner, he added, and he wants productive relations with Beijing. According to Marles, quote, we continue to advocate to China about these issues, again in a very calm, sensible, and moderate way. During the talks, Japan and Australia agreed to bolster military ties and lead the region's multilateral defense cooperation. The two ministers agreed to form a comprehensive framework for strategic defense coordination and discuss further details and procedures. At an emergency meeting a few days after the incident, senior officials from the ruling Liberal Democratic Party expressed concern that the radar incident may signal an elevated security risk from China. Prime Minister Takaichi called Chinese behavior dangerous and profoundly regrettable. Japan, she promised, quote, will continue to closely monitor the activities of the Chinese military in the waters and airspace surrounding Japan. This type of confrontation has increasingly characterized the Japan-China security relationship. During June and July 2025, Chinese military aircraft conducted unusually close approaches to Japan's self-defense force planes operating over the East China Sea and the Western Pacific. At the time, Beijing rejected Japan's concerns and instead accused Japanese vessels and aircraft of harassment, arguing that such actions were responsible for escalating maritime and aerial security risks between the two countries. China's defense ministry is now trying to link the lock-on incident directly to the Japanese Prime Minister's Taiwan remarks. Its spokesperson called on Japan to acknowledge what China described as the underlying causes of the incident, reflect on its actions, and withdraw what Beijing called Prime Minister Takaichi's incorrect remarks. Yet Takaichi has shown no sign of backing down. Her statement stands: if China uses force against Taiwan, Japan considers it a survival-threatening situation. China will keep pushing. Beijing has long dispatched vessels into waters surrounding the Senkaku Islands, which Japan administers and China claims as its own, to validate the claim that the territory is disputed. Beijing has increased military activities around the Japanese archipelago in recent months. Especially worrisome are the growing number of joint patrols by Chinese and Russian aircraft, such as one that also occurred in early December. Japan scrambled jets to conduct air defense identification measures, and the following day held a joint military exercise in which U.S. strategic bombers were joined by a fleet of Japanese fighters, signaling the two countries' resolve to promote peace and stability in the region. China tested Takeichi's resolve within weeks of her taking office, and now the pattern is set. More patrols, more locks, more moments where miscalculation could turn simulation into all-out war.